Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a look at Michel Reijinga. Remember him? Key figure in the Dutch Corona demonstrations.
Yeah, and specifically his recent reflections were drawing from an interview he did, quite a candid one actually, on the Pound News YouTube channel.
Right. So our mission here is really to get inside his head bit, understand where he stands now, his views on current stuff, and, how that whole period impacted him personally.
Exactly. And it's crucial to state up front. This is all based on his perspective from that specific interview. We're reporting on what he said.
Okay, let's dive in. First big thing, he's changed. He acknowledges it himself, says he's deliberately stepped away from being that protest leader.
He literally says he feels done with the whole topic, which is quite something, considering how central he was.
Totally. He says he's not actively involved anymore, not even like chanting the old slogans in private or anything.
It really paints a picture of someone wanting a quieter life now, doesn't it? A real contrast to his past visibility. Makes you wonder what prompted such a definitive step back.
Well, the conversation moves on to current events, and it's revealing. They talk about the Rotterdam Gaza protest.
He didn't see it himself, he notes, but heard about al-Qaeda flags being there.
And his reaction, he calls it scandalous. He
Yeah.
really emphasizes that demonstrations need rules.
And here's where he draws a comparison. He feels there's a difference in how authorities handled, say, pro-Palestine protests or Extinction Rebellion compared to the Corona demos.
Right. He perceives a disparity, like his protests got a tougher ride.
Yeah, maybe because they were so directly challenging the government policies of the day, that's sort of the implication.
Then the topic shifts to, well, the alleged consequences of vaccinations. This is still clearly on his mind.
It seems so. He claims he's seeing or hearing about a rise in cancer, even something he calls turbo cancer, and he links it to the vaccines.
He mentions a Telegraph article from that very day, apparently, and also talks about increased overall mortality, strokes.
Now, to be fair, the interviewer does push back a bit, asking about correlation versus causation.
And Reijinga says,
He acknowledges it's complex, which
yeah.
is important, yeah. But he still holds on to these concerns based on what he's encountered. It shows that skepticism hasn't really gone away for some people.
But here's a really key clarification he makes. He's very clear. His demonstrations were aimed at the root government's policies.
Not anti-vaccination, per se.
Exactly. He says he believes in individual choice. He wouldn't get vaccinated himself, he adds, but the core issue for him was policy, government action.
And he sounds a bit frustrated, perhaps, that he got pigeonholed as just a Corona demonstrator or anti-vaxxer.
Yeah, he feels his critique was broader than that. He saw it as about government overreach.
Which is a sentiment you hear from others involved too, right? That their motives were maybe more complex than the label suggested.
So how did it all start? How did these protests get so big? He talks about the very beginning, September 2020.
Just him, a microphone, maybe 150 people. He says he almost gave up then.
But he didn't. He decided to go bigger, aiming for January 17th, 2021.
And the growth. He puts a lot of that down to social media, online networks, connecting people.
Sharing info, organizing. That snowball effect we see with online movements.
It really shows the power of those digital tools in mobilizing people quickly.
And then that January 17th demo got banned by the government.
Yeah, citing the 1.5-meter rule. And Reijinga believes that ban is what really cemented the Corona demonstrator label on him and the movement.
He also mentions the slogans from that time, Oproot and Roverhide.
Powerful stuff. Oproot, basically get lost root.
Yeah.
And Roverhide, rogue government.
Pretty clear message there.
Oh, yeah. Very direct expression of that anti-government feeling, that deep distrust that was fueling things. Became real rallying cries.
Okay, shifting gears a bit to his views on political figures now. Geert Wilders' comment about Rotterdam, the Mecca on Damas one.
Reijinga supports Wilders' right to say it. Frames it as freedom of expression.
He even adds context, noting you can see mosques in Rotterdam making the comment. Well, descriptive in a way from his viewpoint.
It fits his pattern, doesn't it?
Sure.
A very strong defense of free speech, even the controversial kind.
He talks about his political sympathies, too. Said he had some for Baudet, then later for Wilders.
And now?
Now he says he leans towards FVD, Baudet's party. But he's also pragmatic, acknowledging Wilders has a tough job implementing his agenda now with coalition politics and compromises.
He makes a comparison to U.S. politics, actually.
Yeah.
Maybe a bit simplistic, but he mentions Biden's wall versus Trump reversing it as an example of, decisive action he doesn't see in the Netherlands.
Interesting comparison. It shows his frustration with the Dutch system, maybe. The compromises, the slower pace.
Seems that way. He seems to value that more direct approach, even if he doesn't agree with everything someone like Trump does.
Speaking of Trump, he has mixed feelings, sees some good, but also points to things he found unacceptable. He lumps Wilder's old Kopfwaden tax idea, the headscarf tax, into that category, too.
Okay, so nuances there. What about May 4th, Remembrance Day?
Very firm stance. He strongly opposes bringing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict into it.
Why is that?
He believes May 4th should only be about WWII victims, period. People can remember others privately, sure, but the official commemoration shouldn't be broadened.
He sees it as chipping away at Dutch traditions then.
Exactly. That's the frame. Another tradition under threat, in his view.
During the pandemic, that 75 years of freedom narrative was everywhere. How does he look back on using that kind of language?
He says it felt like a hard-hitting message at the time, reflecting how restricted people felt. But he acknowledges the huge difference between that and actual WWII oppression. He sounds unsure if he'd use that comparison again now.
Bit of reflection there. Recognizing the weight of that comparison.
What about the yellow stars some protesters wore? That was incredibly controversial.
He claims he didn't actually see it happen. Says he was too busy managing the huge crowds. Plus, he was physically limited after surgery.
And he didn't address it later with his security team.
No. He says by then the movement was already starting to break apart, fracturing. So it seems it just wasn't dealt with.
Which points to the chaos and maybe the lack of central control in such large decentralized events.
Could be. And the internal division starting to show.
So is he involved in any demonstrating now?
Pretty much no. He did mention one recent thing, Amsterdam restaurant owners protesting Mayor Halsema.
And he went.
Yeah, but he described it more as like a social thing, supporting people he knew, not really hardcore activism on his part.
Interesting. What was his initial spark for getting into activism way back?
It wasn't just Corona, he says. It started earlier, opposing a hospital closure back in 2018. Then it grew into a broader dissatisfaction with the government.
And the Coronaprotests gave him what?
A daily purpose, he admits. Something to focus on during that intense period.
Does he think people miss it? The protests, the community?
He acknowledges some probably do miss the community aspect. He even mentions the free hugs, which he personally disliked, by the way.
He wasn't there for the hugs.
No, he emphasizes his focus was always the policy protest, not the social side.
And the cost. Activism isn't free.
Far from it. He talks about a significant financial cost.
Yeah.
And huge personal hardship. Bad press mentions a rioter leader headline in the Telegraph.
Ouch. That must have impacted his work.
Totally. He's self-employed, says he got canceled professionally, struggled to find new work, and currently he's actually on sick leave with a hernia.
Wow. He also offers a kind of self-diagnosis, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. He wonders if he has an anti-authority disorder, just a deep-seated frustration with the system.
He sounds generally fed up with how things are run in the Netherlands.
Very much so. He even talks about maybe moving to Spain, though not a touristy bit, he adds.
But he knows this constant frustration isn't good for him.
Oh yeah, he admits it's bad for his health, creates constant mental pressure. But paradoxically. He also says his mental state actually improved temporarily during the protests because he had that clear purpose, that fight.
That's complex. A stressful outlet, maybe?
Something like that. And it's a lighter moment, too. He jokingly mentions being a bit of a chick magnet during the protests because he was so visible.
Really?
Yeah, but he quickly says he wasn't interested. Prefers a quiet life now he's over 50, especially after having attention before as a DJ. Wants peace and quiet.
Okay, let's talk about his views on the media. That's a big theme.
Huge. He definitely observes a massive rise in distrust of mainstream media since Corona.
The whole NOS's fake news sentiment that was common in his movement.
Exactly. And the belief that the media is controlled maybe by the government, maybe by the WEF, the World Economic Forum.
And he sees POW News, the channel doing the interview, as different.
Yes, he praises them basically as one of the few outlets offering an alternative view.
What's his theory about why mainstream media is like that, in his view?
He suggests it's partly laziness. Journalists just regurgitating press releases from Brussels without doing their own digging.
He points to different newspapers often reporting the exact same thing as evidence.
Pretty much, yeah. Lack of independent inquiry, as he sees it.
Now, the interviewer pushes back a bit, suggesting maybe the public reaction during Corona was more about panic, maybe people not fully grasping everything.
Reijinga doesn't buy that. He argues people just tend to follow the herd, accept information without thinking critically.
And he believes powerful forces influence Brussels, which then directs the media.
That's his chain of thought, yeah. A top-down influence shaping the narrative that reaches the public. It's a deep skepticism of established institutions.
He does reflect on the slogans like "No S is fake news," though. Admits there was a lack of nuance.
Yeah, on both sides, he suggests. Media calling protesters whoppies, protesters dismissing all mainstream media. He sees it as polarization.
And that WWII comparison, calling it sharp now,
Yeah.
but necessary.
Necessary to get attention, he seems to think. You need strong messages, even extreme ones, to break through. And he notes, well, the media did eventually cover his protests.
So the controversial messaging worked, in a way, to get noticed.
That seems to be his justification looking back. A calculated risk, perhaps.
So, wrapping up, the interviewer asks the big question, is he happy now?
And it's not a simple answer. He says yes and no. Personally, yes. Happy with his relationship, enjoys time with his kids. Relaxed on that front.
But the L?
His health. The declining health is a major drag on his overall happiness. He even says denying he's unhappy would upset his loved ones, so it's clearly a significant factor.
Health is the big shadow, then.
It really seems to be the primary negative impacting his well-being right now. A constant reminder, maybe, of the toll everything took.
So, reflecting on this whole deep dive, we've really traced the journey of Michel Reijinga, someone right at the heart of that, well, really tumultuous period in the Netherlands.
Yeah, the key things that stand out are his clear move away from activism, but also the persistence of his anti-establishment views,
Right.
Plus the very real personal cost.
And those critical, sometimes nuanced, sometimes not, reflections on media, public opinion, the pandemic response, it's all still brewing there.
Definitely.
So maybe a final thought for you, the listener. When you look at a story like Reijinga's, what does it tell us about the lasting impact of these big social movements, both on the people involved and on society itself?
Yeah, and how do these intense personal experiences shape how we all understand these big public events? What can his journey suggest about conviction, about the price of taking a stand, and maybe about how people change over time? Lots to think about.